Good morning. Systems check. Are we a go? Systems check. Oh,
Are
yeah.
we a go?
We're working. Perfect. Good morning. How we doing? Close out of this here. So we are going to be covering infinitives today. Last week we covered subjunctive. Before that, we had been covering participles. These are all non-indicative moods, meaning there's no time. There's no time significance. And so infinitives are like, they're kind of easy, but they're kind of not. You'll see what I mean. Let's dive in here. This will probably be 20 minutes. 20-minute lecture, no big deal. So it'll give you plenty of time to study up, practice the workbook, and solidify the concepts. But infinitives are fun. Like I said, they're easy to identify. What's tricky is how they're used. Okay? So don't take them for granted. Take them seriously. So what is an infinitive? Well, an infinitive is simply put, it's a verbal noun. It's a verb that's turned into a noun. Now, participles are verbal adjectives. The thing about adjectives, though, is they can be substantive. And when they're substantive, they're functioning like a... That's right, you got it. Like a noun. So don't confuse the two. Participles are verbal adjectives. Infinitives are verbal nouns. Okay? What is an infinitive? Well, in English, it would be the equivalent of, quote, to study. It's when you put the word to in front of a verb. Usually, this is how we see it in our English dictionaries, to study. Whereas in the Greek dictionary, the lexicon, it's in the first person singular. I study. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Infinitive is to study. Now, depending on which lexicon you're looking at, sometimes they give you the infinitive. But the ones we use, both in the back of the blue hymnal as well as in BDAG, it's all in the first person singular. So keep that in mind. Now, Greek infinitives are indeclinable. Okay, remember, it's a verbal noun, right? Nouns have case, number, and gender. But infinitives are indeclinable, meaning they don't have case, number, and gender. But they are perceived as singular neuter. Okay, they are perceived as singular neuter. Now, because of that, when it's preceded by the article will always be singular neuter. Okay? The case will be determined by function. So is it nominative? Well, it probably will be if it's the subject. So depending on how it's functioning will determine which case it is, even though you can't see the case in the infinitive. Now, infinitives can take direct objects. So keep that in mind. They can also have adverbial modifiers, right? To study quickly. Infinitives do not have person or number because they are indeclinable. But again, singular neuter. Singular neuter. Now, when it comes to Greek specifically, we're dealing with tense stems. And of course, just as we saw with subjunctive, because there is no time aspect, we're dealing with present tense stem, aorist tense stem, perfect tense stem. When it's present tense stem, it has continuous aspect. So, for example, to study continuously. It's okay to use that helping word, continuously. When it's aorist tense stem, it has an undefined aspect, meaning to study. We don't know if it's continuous action. We don't know if it's perfective action. We just know that there's studying going on, and it's happening, but we don't know anything else. What chapter? Oh gosh. Let me look. Hey, it's good to see you again. 1990. I remember seeing you a little while ago. Liberty, right? English teacher, if I remember correctly. I think this is chapter... There we go. Chapter 32, Infinitive. We are almost done. We've only got a few weeks left of lecture material, and then we're going to spend 5 weeks translating 1 John. So that'll be exciting. But I will be reviewing different interpretive semantics for each noun case and each mood. So yeah, we'll still have some review going on, but that will be more advanced, in-depth stuff. No need to worry about going back and getting caught up. Just stick with us, and you can go back at your own leisure whenever you need to. That's kind of the beauty of YouTube and archives. So thanks for joining us today. So when it's the aorist tense stem, it's undefined aspect. There is no time specified whatsoever, simply to study. Perfect, that's completed aspect, to have studied. Again, the idea of completion here is it was done in the past, it's continued into the present, but in this case, it's without the aspect of time. All we know is that it was completed, to have studied. So this is the nuances of the infinitive in Greek. So you need to learn the morphemes. Fortunately, there's only 3, and there's no other person or number, right? So the active present is, the morpheme is in, liin, for example. The middle is esthe, so liesthe, and the passive is identical. This follows the same rules and principles of the present active indicative, where as well as the middle passive. The active is separate from the middle passive, but the middle and passive are identical. Okay, so context would help you determine if it's functioning middle or passively. So that's the present. Learn these morphemes. Be able to recognize them on spot. Now the first aorist, it follows similar principles as the aorist active indicative in the first aorist, right? You see a sigma alpha. The only difference is you've got a iota as well. Se, sasthe, thine. And in fact, the middle, same kind of thing. And the passive, you see thine. So we're still following the same understandings of what we've learned before. We're just adding on the iota or alpha iota. Okay, so these are easy to identify. Lise, lisaste, lithine. Okay, to destroy oneself, to be destroyed. Now the second aorist uses its own tense stem, and therefore it's easy to identify as aorist. You just need to be able to identify the morpheme that goes with it. So the active follows the same as the present active. It's just using a different tense stem. In, labin, instead of lambano. So that would be lambin. That's the present infinitive. This one is labin. There's no me. Okay, because it's a different tense stem. Labesthe is the middle. Notice the passive here from grapho. And that's because for some reason or another, I forget the reason why, grapho generally is passive. It is written because Scripture can't write itself. right? So it's a passive action. So graphene, again, you see the ida, ni, tense formative, but with the alpha iota added on. And that's how we know we're dealing with the passive here. So labine, to receive, labeste, to receive oneself, or something like that. And graphene, it to write, or to be written. Now the perfect, again, it's that completed action. So the active, we see the kappa. This is just like we saw with the tense formative and the perfect active indicative, right? We still see reduplication, but then we have this epsilon ni alpha iota added on. Lelikene, to have, or to have completed. The middle, stay. What's going to separate this out from the aorist is the reduplication. Leliste. So the reduplication is really, really helpful. Make no mistake, when you see reduplication, you're dealing with the perfect here. And so this one, to have destroyed oneself. And then passive, leliste, it's identical, right? It follows the same kind of idea. But context is key, right? Context is absolutely critical in a lot of the New Testament. So that's something you'll just have to come to terms with if you're not already. But being an English teacher yourself, I'm sure you get it. So when we're dealing with the infinitive, here's my tips. Most of the time it ends in alpha iota. So that makes it really easy to tell you're dealing with the infinitive. Look for the ending and then determine the stem. Because you're most likely going to be dealing with alpha iota, you start there, start at the end, work your way backwards, identify the stem. The stem will then help you determine, is it present? Is it aorist? Is it perfect? Just be aware, you can have some unexpected contracts. Alpha ni, so the sigma can drop out. Same with un. So when you see alpha ni or un at the end, you might be dealing with an infinitive. Now, the next thing to look for would be the presence of a singular, neuter, definite article. Because when you see that in front of a verb, you might be dealing with an infinitive. Now, it could also be what? A participle. Okay? But then you know your participle morphemes like the back of your hand, and that won't throw you off. If you're like, wow, that doesn't look like a participle, but I see the article, process of elimination, you're dealing with an infinitive. So again, the infinitive bears no time significance. So it's just like the participle, it's just like the subjunctive. Why is that? Because it's not indicative. Indicative tells us something about time. It indicates something about reality. Whereas all these other moods do not. They're dealing with other aspects, like possibility and probability, not reality. Or in this case, it's a verbal noun. Or in the case of the participle, it's a verbal adjective. Okay? So, because there's no time significance, we do have to rely on the stem to understand the aspect or the force of that word. The present is continuous. It's continuous action, but no time significance. The aorist is undefined action, no time significance. The perfect is completed action, no time significance. We don't know when it's happening. We just know that it is happening. And when it is happening, is it continuous action? Is it undefined action? Or is it completed action? It makes it fun. It livens up the text when you're dealing with this kind of stuff. And here's why. There are different uses of the infinitive. You can have the infinitive where it has multiple subjects. Finite verbs are limited to a subject, right? You have subject, verb, object. Infinitives are not. So an infinitive can be followed by two nouns. Usually it's double accusative. The first accusative is the subject. The second accusative is the object. So just be aware of that. And it's not always the case where it's a double accusative, but that can be the case. So just be aware. Infinitives can take multiple subjects, and then you use the context to determine who's the subject, what's the object. Present is continuous. I would use the helping word continuously when you're dealing with a present tense stem infinitive. Now, yes, you can translate, I call it a participle. Let me pull up my advanced grammar. Great question, by the way. Present continuous, translate like a gerund, verb plus ing. When I first started studying Greek, I did not have a good grasp of English. Full transparency, totally did not. I struggled through English in high school. I really did. And I would not say I'm a master of English by any means at this point. I'm not. I'll be honest. I feel like I have a better understanding of Greek and Hebrew than I do of English. In fact, I try and write English based on my knowledge of Greek. Maybe that's sad, but that's the truth. When I was learning Greek, I had no idea what a gerund was. And the Blue Hymnal introduced the idea of what is a gerund, and then said we're not going to study Greek in those terms. We're just going to call them participles. And he gives his reasoning why. I have no idea because I don't study English. I'm not sure what the difference is between a participle and a gerund. But that's worth looking at if you want to go back a few chapters to the participles, the introduction to participles in the Blue Hymnal. But I got the advanced grammar out to pull up the infinitives because if I recall correctly, there are times where you might translate an infinitive like a participle. Let's see. No, I don't want the... .587. So this is the follow-up book to the Blue Hymnal. This is the second edition, I think. I think there's a third edition. Maybe this is the first edition and there's a second edition now. This is old. Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics by Daniel B. Wallace. And what's cool is he took numerous grammars and consolidated them into this one in a really helpful format. I love this thing. I did own some of the classic grammars. They're super expensive. I wouldn't recommend it. They're highly technical. This is probably all you need, to be quite honest, unless you're writing some sort of dissertation. What was it, 587? Okay. So adverbial uses, purpose, result, time, cause, means, complementary, substantival uses, subject, direct object, indirect discourse, appositional, epexegetical, independent uses, imperatival, absolute. Those are all semantic categories. Then he does a structural category instead. Anarthrous infinitives, articular infinitives, genitive, dative, or governed by preposition. Maybe I'm incorrect on this. I know it's not purpose. So you might translate it. Yeah, you might translate it as a participle when combined with other prepositions. So like meta to infinitive, that would be after. So it bears a relationship to the temporal. Yep. And the same thing is true for contemporaneous. En to plus infinitive, while, as, or when. So yes, absolutely. So good call out. You are right. In some senses, you will translate it like a gerund, or as I understand it, a participle, using certain helping words, but that's going to be typically in combination with other prepositional phrases that are included with the infinitive. Without such prepositional phrases, translate it maybe to study continuously. Now, depending on the context, you might not even need or use the word continuously, but you'll know that's the force of the verb, and that would influence either your translation or, at the very least, your interpretation. So, good question. Some verbs might not take a subject in the accusative or in the nominative. It might take a dative subject, a dative direct subject. I want to say it's like verbs of wishing and praying, things like that. I think I've got examples of it in a couple slides. For now, though, keep in mind, of course, substantive infinitives usually will have the article, but they don't have to. When they have the article, it's articular infinitive. When they don't, it's just inarticular. As you probably understand, infinitives can be awkward, especially when you're dealing with translation. So it might require some finesse, right? And that's okay. Make the best sense of it as you can with your English, using the understanding of the present aorist or perfect tense stems, combining with the context, especially if there's a preposition involved. You might want to look up the preposition in BDAG to see if it has special use cases with the infinitive. And then do the best with it as you can, because it won't always work out in a wooden word-for-word translation. It'll require some finesse. And c'est la vie. That's life. Now, substantive infinitives that stand independent of another verb can be like commands. There's no head verb to which it's attached. They can be awkward as well. I'm thinking of the verse in Philippians, to live is Christ and to die is gain. That's two different infinitives. There's no main verb. It's literally to live Christ, to die gain. There's no verb. So you have to, much like an adjective, a predicate adjective, you got to supply the verb to be. It's just in this case, it's substantive and it's independent. So it's like, what's going on here? It really causes you to pause. Now, there are complementary infinitives that stand in connection with another verb. So, for example, D, it is necessary. D will typically have an infinitive following it. Existin, it is lawful. It is lawful to do something, right? So it's going to be followed by an infinitive. Melo, diname, archome, these are all typically followed by an infinitive. Yeah, exactly. There are 3 less common verbs that can take a complementary infinitive. Fellow, I wish. I wish to do this. Kelevo, I command you do this. Ophilo, I ought to do this, right? So these are followed by infinitives, but these don't occur as often. So we were talking earlier about prepositional phrases and the articular infinitive. When you see these, it's a phrase. It's a collective unit. You need to translate it as a whole. You might want to put parentheses around it to get used to seeing them together. The case of the article is determined by the preposition. So, accusative or genitive or dative, those are your options for the preposition, right? So that will help determine the article. The article will still be neuter, singular, but the case will be followed by whatever the prepositional case is. These are idiomatic constructions. You cannot translate these word for word. You will need to memorize these. I would strongly suggest making vocabulary cards for the common ones, which I will provide on the next slide. Otherwise, you will need to look them up. When you come to a preposition plus an articular infinitive, you'll need to look up the preposition and see if there's any special use cases. BDAG is your friend. Probably some of the best $130 you could spend is on BDAG. I know that's expensive for a book. It's not the most expensive, but it is expensive, but it's totally worth it. If you can get it in electronic form, I have it on electronic form. I used to have the hardbound version, but now I have the electronic form, which is really awesome. And that's what I would recommend. The electronic form I have is on Accordance, which is Oak Tree Soft. Can't remember what their overarching brand name is. But it's the same price. But then you also have to buy the software to run it. So it's a little additional overhead, but it's lightning fast to find words, super convenient, super helpful. So here are 6 common constructions. So dia in the accusative plus an articular infinitive would indicate reason and would be translated because blank. Is in the accusative plus an articular infinitive indicates purpose. So you would translate it in order that blank. Pros in the accusative plus an articular infinitive indicates purpose as well and would be translated in order that. What's the difference? I don't know. You would need to look that up in BDAG. But these are the phrases to be on the lookout for. I would highly recommend creating vocab cards out of these. Again, these are in the Blue Hymnal, so if you need to go back and look, you can. Plus, I'll have the archive up later if you need to review. 3 more. 1 in genitive, 1 in dative, and 1 more in accusative. Pro plus the genitive plus an articular infinitive indicates time. So before, this is like prolegomena, the first things. It comes before the rest of the text, right? Before. And in dative, plus the articular infinitive is when or while, also indicating time. Meta in the accusative plus the articular infinitive is after. So you can see before, during, and after kind of a thing. So these are all temporal uses, these 3. So be on the lookout for those as well. The nice thing about the infinitive is there is a little bit of overlap in use with the subjunctive and also with the participle. In that it can indicate purpose, it can indicate result. When it comes to purpose, it's the purpose of an action being indicated using either pros or pro. We just saw, I I think we saw pros earlier. So the purpose of an action can be indicated using either pros or pro. The genitive article plus the infinitive can also indicate purpose. So a genitive article, so to plus infinitive, can also indicate purpose. And then, of course, the infinitive by itself can simply indicate purpose. So you get the idea that infinitive at its core is really to show purpose. Purpose. But it could also be result. So oste plus infinitive indicates the result of an action. So purpose is more front-facing. This is the goal. Result is more rear-facing. This is the outcome. Sometimes they overlap, and they can be hard to distinguish sometimes. You would translate this infinitive of result with a finite English form. So you might not use to. And that's okay. You're worried not about the translation so much as the force. It's up to you as the interpreter to help make those connections if it doesn't come through in the translation itself. It can also be used with indirect discourse, usually started by OT. OT can introduce indirect discourse with finite verbs, but infinitives can themselves, in and of themselves, simply start indirect discourse. Indirect discourse. So you might need to use the word that. It might be helpful to include that, even though OT is not present, when you're dealing with an infinitive that's seemingly introducing some sort of discourse. And that's it. So make sure you practice the content in the workbook. Read through chapter 32. Follow this keynote, and then practice. Infinitives they're pretty easy to identify. The harder part is interpreting them. And then that's it. Next week, what are we doing next week? Imperative? I think it's imperative next week. Yep, imperative next week. The following week will be didomi. And I think all the other odds and ends. We really only have 2 weeks left. And then we'll be going into review and translation. Yeah, get the workbook. The nice thing is the answers are online. So if you do get stuck, you can always look it up. And the workbook answers are free. So, and if you need to, if money's an issue, just get just print out the workbook answers, because I believe it will have, if I remember correctly, it will have the questions and the answers. So you could always cover up the answers as needed. But it's definitely helpful to practice, solidify the contents. I'm really looking forward to, in a few weeks, translating 1 John. This will probably be my 4th or 5th time translating it. It's fun, and we'll be able to use every aspect that we've learned in the last 20 weeks. We'll get to look at special uses of indicative, participles, imperative, infinitive, subjunctive, accusative, nominative, dative, genitive. We'll even look at textual critical analysis in the last week and do some textual criticism and figure out what the apparatus means at the bottom of the critical text. And we'll even think through what's the original text in that specific variant, which is challenging. It's challenging. But that's part of the translation process. Sometimes we got to figure out. Yeah, I'm glad you came by. Sorry we missed you for the last couple weeks, but the good thing is those videos are there. So if you need to go back and watch them, you can. And that's kind of the point. That's why I'm doing it. So for anyone else who is joining us later through the archives, don't forget to hit follow, hit subscribe, hit the bell, get those little brackets around the bell for notifications when I do go live. But I'll continue to be here 9 a.m. Pacific each Saturday for the foreseeable future. And plan ahead. We'll start Hebrew in January. That'll be fun. I've never taught Hebrew before, but I'm looking forward to it. I'll follow the same kind of format as what we're doing for Greek. The only difference that I'll do for Hebrew is I'll do the vocabulary with the lecture rather than doing the vocabulary daily and separately. That's been a beast. I won't do that again. But I'll finish it out for this series, and then I'll change it up for Hebrew. Cool. Well, we'll see you next week, 1990. Thanks for joining. And for anyone else, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.